Let's talk about stress and the way it ruins everything. You're listening to An Amber a Day, the Functional Nutrition Podcast. And I am your host, Amber Fisher. All right, so today I want to talk about something that I think we don't talk about enough in the nutrition field, and that is stress and the effect that stress can have on your health, on your body, and particularly when stress is combined with childhood trauma. So, full disclosure, I'm a nutritionist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I have no real training in that field. However, I do have a lot of training in functional nutrition and functional medicine, which is a holistic, we call that a holistic paradigm. And in any holistic paradigm, we have to look at things from multiple perspectives. We don't look at the body as if it's just this one thing, and like your heart is your heart, and it's just, if something goes wrong with your heart, then it's a heart problem. And if something goes wrong with your lungs, it's a lung problem. And if something goes wrong with your hormones, it's an endocrine problem. We look at everything as connected, right? And so the other things that we think are connected and that we know are connected to the body's health are our experiences, our environment, the foods we eat, the people we talk to, the people that are in our lives. So toxicity in our life can have multiple different levels. I'm sure we've all experienced this before, right? But many of us who struggle with hormonal imbalances have this underpinning of having experienced childhood trauma. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you are interested in that, if you relate to that, I think you'll want to listen. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the science behind how this works and what the effects will be. And then, of course, like practical solutions, because that's what I'm all about, right? Practical solutions. So before we get started, it's been a little bit since I have uploaded a podcast, and so I want to update you guys on my life. So if you're just here for the content, scroll on, fast forward. But if you're here to know about all the things, then we're going to get into it. I just got back yesterday from a trip to see my in-laws, spent some time with my husband's family. We took Calvin up there to spend time with them. So we had a lot of fun. One of the cool things we did was we went to a blueberry ranch. It's called Blueberry Ranch. And we picked blueberries. And I'm from South Texas, and I've never picked blueberries before, except one time when I was in North Carolina and happened upon some wild blueberries, which I thought was really cool. But I love blueberries. Obviously, they're really nutritious. Blueberries are one of these cool foods that has a lot of research behind it. So there was a study that found that if you eat blueberries, a certain amount of blueberries, it can reduce blood pressure. I'll see if I can link the study for that. We also know that blueberries have resveratrol in them, which is a powerful antioxidant, has anti-aging properties, great for your skin, also by extension really good for your hormonal health. So I'm a big fan of the blueberry, and it was cool because this was an organic ranch, so organic farm, I guess I should say. So we had they took us out to these little rows where the blueberries are growing on these big bushes, and they kind of said, okay, you have from here to here, and you can pick as many as you want. And we're like, okay, well, we have the baby with us, and he loves blueberries. This is one of his favorite foods. I would say it's his favorite food, but he ate so many blueberries during the trip that he now has slightly a blueberry aversion. But it was his favorite food for a while there. So I said, can he eat some of them, or do we have to weigh them first? And they're like, no, he can eat as many as he wants. You guys can all eat as many as you want. It was like paradise. So here we are by the blueberry bush, just picking away, filling up our buckets. And oh my gosh, it takes so much longer to fill up those buckets than you think it's going to. We were picking blueberries for an hour and still didn't have a full bucket. So I have a lot, and now I understand why blueberries are so expensive. But yeah, we got to pick them. We were just gorging ourselves on them. I was doing some intermittent fasting that day because I've been doing intermittent fasting lately. And I decided to break my fast to eat blueberries. And it was worth it. So it was great. Calvin had a really fun time. He liked picking them off the bush and eating them, and I just thought it was really cool because we don't often think about where our food comes from. We don't think about the process that goes into growing them, and what a lot of people forget, especially with fruits and vegetables and other plants, is that part of the price of the plant or the fruit or whatever is the cost of the care of that plant for however long. Some of you may not know, my parents own a nursery, a plant nursery, and I grew up there, and people don't often understand why plants, which are of course like a renewable resource, right? Well, like, why do they cost money, or why are they as expensive as they can be? And the reason is the care that goes into them, and that care includes water, which costs money, and electricity, which costs money, and fertilizer, and all these other things. So we don't often think about the beginning to end process of like how those fruits and things that we eat get into our grocery store. And especially with organic fruits, we often think like, okay, well, why would I spend this much more money on something organic when I can get a larger quantity that's not organic for cheaper? And the reason organic produce is so much more expensive is because when you don't use as many pesticides, you get a lot more, you get a lot less volume, I guess. So the plants tend to be, like the fruit tends to be smaller, but that doesn't mean that it tastes worse. In fact, it usually tastes better. And one of my little rules of thumb with fruits is like the smaller the fruit, compared to like what's conventionally raised, like probably the better it's going to taste. So in the case of strawberries, for example, have you ever had a conventional strawberry and then an organic strawberry at the same time? There's no comparison. Organic strawberries are way better taste wise, and that makes a difference, because the taste is not just an indicator of like, oh, it's more sweet, it has more sugar. The taste is also an indicator that it has more nutrition in it. It's not just water, it has vitamins and all these antioxidants and polyphenols, all these fun words. So yeah, we don't think about like, why does organic produce cost more? A lot of us are just dismissive of using it because it costs more. And I don't want to get into like all the systemic issues today around food access and all that, but of course that's a huge part of this. Is like, some of us don't have access to to organic produce. Some of us can't afford it. Do the best that you can, right? But if you have the means to afford to eat more organically, it is better for your health. It's significantly less pesticide exposure. Not completely organic farms do use some types of pesticides and stuff, so you're not completely off the hook, but it's better for you. So I just thought it was cool to see from beginning to end. And one of the little things I was doing was like fantasizing about like, what would it have been like to be, a hunter-gatherer family, and like, here I am, the gatherer, like I'm gathering some blueberries, and how awesome would it have been to like come upon a blueberry bush that hadn't been like picked apart by birds and already like foraged by other people, just to find fruit just growing, especially if you've been subsisting mostly off of like meat and things. Like, how wonderful would that have been to find some blueberries? It's exciting. And I wonder like, yeah, what they did with it, and maybe I should do some research on that. But I just think about the little kids and how exciting it must have been to like come upon some, like to have berries in the spring or summer, and to like find honey and different things. I don't know. I don't know if any of you guys think about that, but I like to think about that and give props to my ancestors, to all of our ancestors for the hard work that they did keeping the human race going. That was not easy. So, yeah, here we are. So that was fun. We had a really good week. We went up to Chicago as well and took Calvin to the aquarium. He loved the dolphins. And we took him to the zoo, and he got to We also went up to Green Bay, Wisconsin, which some of my husband's relatives live there, and so we went to Bay Beach. Anyone from Wisconsin, maybe you know about Bay Beach, and Calvin got to ride some rides. It was just a really nice week. Really good to see family. Really hard to fly with a toddler. Wasn't expecting that because Calvin is such a, for lack of a better term, he's a very well-behaved little boy. Like, we usually have no problems with anything like that, and so we're not really prepared for it. And on the flights, he had just had enough, and I don't blame him. I mean, it sucks. Being on flights is like, not fun. Of course, it's a huge privilege to be able to fly, but it's not fun while you're doing it. So when we were on the way home, we flew from Milwaukee to Atlanta, and then we had a layover there, and then Atlanta back to San Antonio. And during the Milwaukee to Atlanta flight, that was it. He'd had enough, and he just cried, and we were able to kind of calm him down some, but he was not happy, to the point where after the flight was over, it was all men around us, and a couple of them turned around to let us know they thought we had done a good job, and people don't usually say that, because I've flown with Calvin before, and when he's good, they say other things, or they don't say anything at all. But when the baby is like intense, people feel the need to kind of like soothe you and make you feel better that you didn't upset them, which is so nice, by the way. If you are ever flying, if you're not a parent and you're ever flying with somebody who is a parent, just trust me, like, we're having a way worse time than you are. I know it's annoying to listen to babies cry. I used to get really annoyed on planes when babies would cry because I didn't know any better, but like, the parents are probably mortified. If they're anything like me, I mean, I just like can't stand the idea of like annoying people on a flight. So they were really kind and were like, "You guys did a good job." So we're like, okay, so it was pretty intense. And then when we got to Atlanta, he was way past his nap time. He wouldn't nap. He fell asleep in the stroller, and I literally kept him propped, like leaned back in the stroller so that his head wouldn't fall and he wouldn't wake himself up, for like an hour. But he woke up and he was just angry from the second he woke up, because he did not want to be in the airport. And then when we got on a plane again, oh boy, he was not happy about that. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because we got really, the universe worked it out for us, man, because I don't think there were any other empty seats on the flight, but somehow the seat next to us, no one sat in it. So we managed to get a free like seat for Calvin, and he was having a really hard time until the plane boarded, and just like, I've never seen him cry like that. I mean, it was really intense. It was really hard to watch. Like, even I even had like some emergency candy and stuff, and nothing was helping. But as soon as I was able to like scoot over and give him a seat to himself, he could kind of climb around and everything, all of a sudden he just cheered up, and he had a really good rest of the flight. Like, he had fun. He ate potato chips. Yeah, we made it work. And it was really hard though. So we won't be flying again for a while. I do have to go up for a conference, the CNS conference soon, and he's coming. So, but that's going to be the last time. Those flights are nonstop, so that's nice. Anyway, yeah, I just thought I would tell you guys about that. So let's get into today's topic, shall we? We want to talk about childhood trauma and stress. Why is this important? Well, in my work as a nutritionist, I work with women who typically have hormonal imbalances. And it's something that almost always comes up, that at some point I'll be told like, oh, I had a hard childhood, or, I was sexually abused, or was verbally abused, or something traumatic happened. And this is not stuff that people usually volunteer at the beginning, but it's things that as we get to know each other, we kind of start to talk about. And what I've realized is that it's so common when there are hormonal imbalances for there to be some sort of trauma connection in childhood. And I always wondered why that was. Like, there's different theories, right? I've heard about, like, if you've experienced sexual abuse, and if you believe in chakras, like it messes with the energy of your second chakra, and then that can, since that represents your endocrine system and your reproductive organs, like it can mess with things there. All these different theories and things that I've heard, and I'm not an expert on any of them. I do think that there's something to the chakra stuff, but we won't get into that today. But I do notice like a connection there, and I've always kind of wondered what more scientifically might be the reason behind that, or at least in the Western conception of things. So during my hormone conference, this was something that we did a whole discussion on, and I thought it was incredibly fascinating because when it comes to functional medicine, I'm more interested in the things that have real world impact on my clients, and so this whole hormone conference, we're talking about menopause and hormone replacement therapy and all these other things, and I'm like honing in, waiting to talk about PCOS, and I'm like waiting to talk about thyroid, and I'm waiting to talk about adrenals. So why is this important? I think the temptation is always to say, when we're interested in looking at nutrition and biological reasons why people are having hormonal issues or health issues or whatever, the temptation is to look at all of the different biological pieces that could be at play, right? So with hormonal imbalances, we look at gut health, we look at inflammation, we look at thyroid function, we look at potential food allergies, all these different things that could play roles, right? Nutrient deficiencies. And it's really tempting to just stay there because honestly, in the world that we live in, we could always keep going further and further down the rabbit hole. And I see a lot of people do this, and this is the point when some people reach out to actually become clients because they get really overwhelmed with the fact that they've just drilled deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and down into these obscure diets and supplement regimens and all these different things, and they're not making the progress that they want to make, or they're stuck in an elimination diet or something like that, and they can't get out of it. So the temptation is to keep looking at what are the physical aspects of this, what are the components that relate there that we still haven't addressed yet. And then on the other side of things, the temptation with therapy and mental health is to say, well, these are all, my anxiety, for example, or my depression. These are all mental health issues. So they have a core that's simply focused on mental health. I need to look back at my childhood. I need to look at my traumas, all these things. And it has nothing to do with all these health issues that I'm having. I think that that's the mistake, is really that we separate these two things, because the reality is that all of this is connected into one person. And so obviously the mental health aspects are connected to the physical health aspects, and they probably come from the same root issue. So how do we get at that root issue? Well, we do that by addressing those physical things, yes, but by also addressing the mental things. And that does involve getting a little bit deep into your past and getting deep into your psychology and becoming aware of yourself, your motivations, your pain, the things that you carry, the things that you haven't totally dealt with maybe, because they play a role in how the body's functioning. We can see this quite a bit with people who don't like to or who haven't dealt with trauma, where it becomes like almost buried in the subconscious, and then it comes out physically and is expressed as health issues. So I think a lot of us as practitioners have known that this is happening for some people, but not so much how to deal with it or how to explain it in a way that gets the person thinking about other reasons why they might be having issues besides just, oh, there must be a new food sensitivity or something. So this is really the goal of what I do, is to try to put all these pieces together. And this is one of the big pieces. And so in my hormone conference, we talked quite a bit about the role that these traumatic experiences can play in our later functioning of our health as adults. And I thought it was really interesting for explaining to people just how important that stress reduction piece can be. So I thought I'd explain it all to you in terms that maybe are a little bit more nutritional, that we can understand why stress is such a big thing. So basically, the idea is that if you experience trauma as a child, what it does is it affects your nervous system to the point where you almost become hyperactivated or hypersensitive. So if you've experienced something traumatic during a really critical time in your life as a child, you are going to take on that incident, and your body is going to be hyper aware of safety and hyper focused on maintaining its equilibrium, I guess I should say. And so it'll get very easily caught off balance by different events that trigger that past experience. So what happens in childhood trauma is that it actually changes our resiliency. It changes our nature. And as adults, we find that we have less resilience to stress. Stress can more easily send us over the edge, can more easily topple us over into flare-ups, can more easily affect us when we've had these childhood experiences of trauma. And I know what you're probably thinking. I had a great childhood. I didn't have any trauma. Like, trauma is a big T word. Like, I wasn't, this didn't happen to me or that didn't happen to me. We are really coming into an understanding as a people group about what trauma really means and what things are really traumatic, and realizing that a lot of these foundational experiences of childhood can be traumatic even in the context of a really happy family life. Like, even if you look back on your family and think, wow, that was a great upbringing, like I had a good childhood, my parents were kind people, all that stuff, you can still have had traumatic experiences. And one of the people that was talking at the conference kind of explained it like this. He said, trauma is anything less than nurturing. So if you've ever had experience with a parent figure or even a sibling or somebody who is, especially parent figures, but people who are really close to you in your childhood, that was less than nurturing. These are experiences that can be traumatic, and it's not so much about what the world at large would say is traumatic. It's really about how you perceived it as a child. So if it was traumatic to you, then it was traumatic. And all of us are different with what that means. So a lot of us carry trauma from childhood. And I'll say that in the case of hormonal imbalance, a lot of us carry more than just little t traumas. Like, there is a lot of connection between childhood sexual abuse and these things. So I think it's important to kind of, to be honest about that. I'm not saying that everybody has dealt with that, but it's a thread that we see, and that I definitely see in practice. So it's something that we have to keep an eye on, particularly because traumas like that are a lot more easy to bury or to push aside and to not deal with, especially if they happened as children, and can make it really difficult to look at your body in a way of, love and not shame. So if traumas during childhood make us less resilient to stress as adults, then what happens? Well, as adults, our nervous system is connected to our adrenals, and our adrenals are these glands that sit on top of our kidneys, and they produce stress hormones. They produce something called cortisol. Cortisol is like a stress hormone, but it's also an energy hormone. So you want some, you just don't want too much, you don't want too little. It's important to have it in balance. When we have less resiliency to stress, we more easily produce too much cortisol, which then will send us eventually into adrenal dysfunction. So there's multiple stages of adrenal dysfunction, but the first stage of adrenal dysfunction is just some, typically people experience it as some sleep and energy disturbances, like a second wind at night, having a little trouble falling asleep, and it tends to get worse over time, so that eventually you're tired all day and you're awake at night, or you find that you're really, really energized in the morning, like almost over energized, but then you crash in the afternoon. I mean, there's different iterations of it, but it tends to get worse and worse until eventually your adrenals might just kind of stop producing much cortisol at all. And that's when we would get into, a later stage of adrenal dysfunction, or what some people colloquially would call adrenal fatigue. Now, adrenal fatigue is maybe not a quote unquote real thing, but the principle still stands that the energy loss is definitely real. And I've seen this a lot of times in women. So when we get to those places where our adrenals are out of balance, since our adrenals are so closely connected to our thyroid and our thyroid function, we can easily send that out of balance. Our thyroid is like the sentinel gland for our environment, so it picks up on all the different pieces in our environment, the toxic inputs that we're all exposed to, things in the water, things in our food. It picks up on stress in particular, and any stresses that it's experiencing, especially if those stressful experiences are sort of hyper aware in our body, is going to be more likely to throw our thyroid out of whack. And then that can feed on into other things. Not to mention that when our adrenals are overstressed and overstimulated and producing a lot of cortisol, and we are or when we get to the point, when we get to the point where we're not producing a lot of cortisol, and we're kind of like living off coffee and caffeine to kind of keep us energized and all of that, we start maybe stealing energy from the production of pregnenolone, which is the precursor to eventually to progesterone and estrogen and all that. And so we start stealing energy from the sex hormones, but especially progesterone. And getting into the situation where then our sex hormones are out of balance and we're not producing enough progesterone, and we're just all around, like not having a great time when it comes to hormone balance. So it's really important that we pay attention to the way that we treat our adrenals and the way that we handle our stress. And this is where it gets into some tricky territory, right? Because we hear about stress relief all the time. Like I've even said this many times before, like we have to focus on stress relief, we have to focus on calm, we have to focus on like living in the present moment, all these things. But this can be really, really difficult when you've experienced childhood trauma because, like I said, you're hypersensitive to stress. So things that wouldn't send somebody else over the edge might send you over the edge, And so designing a life around that can become difficult. So what's the real solution to it? Well, I don't have all the answers, but these are things that I know to be helpful from my own experience and from working with clients. First of all, addressing the things that we still carry. If you've experienced childhood trauma, and maybe you didn't realize that it was trauma until now, or you realized it and you just thought like, I'm over that, or whatever it may be. If you're still dealing with health issues and hormonal imbalances, it wouldn't be a bad idea to think about seeing a therapist just to try to work on all of that stuff. Maybe you have resolved it. Maybe it is completely a biological, functional issue. It's definitely possible. But it's also possible that maybe you're not admitting to yourself how deeply you still maybe need to process some things. And I don't mean to like sound pushy about that. It's just that I've seen that before. So be honest with yourself. We all have to be really honest with ourselves here, and myself included, about what we need to process from our past. So get with somebody who's trained and licensed. One of the greatest things you can do is something called EMDR. If you haven't heard of that, I will link below to an article about what EMDR is, but many therapists, professional counselors, all of that they're trained in doing EMDR. And what EMDR can do is it basically helps you to process traumatic events through your more rational brain. So it helps put things into perspective in a very subconscious part of your brain so that it's not affecting you as subconsciously anymore. It helps you to process old events so that they don't have the same sting that they used to. And so that you can put them in rational perspective. And that's really key because especially things that happen as children, they tend to be more in this part of our brain that's a little bit more difficult to reach, difficult to process with, and to reason with. And so this helps pull it in that direction. So I highly recommend EMDR and getting with somebody who's licensed to do that. I think that's step number one. Step number two is to look at places in your life where you can reduce your stress. If you are a hypersensitive to stress person, and it's feasible for you in any sense of the word, it would be maybe a good idea to find a job that's going to give you more freedom to take more time for yourself. So whether that looks like a job that lets you spend more time at home, a job that has good things to say about taking mental health days, or that gives you enough vacation that you can take some mental health days. We all need time to process these things. And when our job is too demanding and bleeds in too much into our boundaries, it really sets us back. This is a major reason why I started my own business instead of working for somebody else, because I'm one of those people who's hypersensitive to stress. And, I had a conversation with my therapist about this project that I was working on and running, and I loved the project, and I liked the people that were involved in it, but the time aspect was really stressing me out, and it was just taking away from my life in a way that I couldn't get behind anymore. And so we had a lot of talks about what should we do about that, and one of the questions she asked me was, well, how much time are you spending on this every week, And she kind of expected me to say, oh, I'm spending, 10 hours, 15 hours, something. I'm spending a large chunk of my time for how much it was stressing me out. And the reality was I was probably spending about 3, maybe 4 hours on this a week. It wasn't that much time, but because I perceived it as this thing that I really was overwhelmed and stressed by, any little length of time with it was too much. And so I made the decision for my mental health to quit the project. This is the same thing with TikTok. Those of you who found me on TikTok, you've probably noticed I haven't made as many videos lately. Well, TikTok was starting to really affect my mental health and drain me a lot. The pressure of feeling like, and I know you guys didn't put this pressure on me, I put it on myself, but the pressure of feeling like I need to make a video every single day and not knowing what to talk about, and then worrying like, am I talking about things that people want to hear about? And the anxiety around that was so stressful. And so I had to come to a place where I said, I'm not going to completely close down my TikTok because I like my TikTok, but I'm going to take a step back from it, and I'm not going to let it overwhelm me anymore. I'm going to set up boundaries with it. So I think my point there with that ramble is to tell you that setting up boundaries for your life, however that has to look for you, is really key in keeping your stress reduced. I think saying no more is one of the biggest things that we can do for self-care. People talk a lot about bubble baths and, self-care days and manicures and pedicures and all these cutesy things. And yeah, those are nice. I mean, I'm not going to deny that a bath is relaxing, but the real way that you get a life that is more conducive to your healing is by getting a life that gives you more time and more space for your healing. and processing things. So see a therapist, EMDR, boundaries. Now, what can you do on the more physical side of things? Well, first I want to say that if you don't address that other stuff, then this will not be getting to the root cause of a lot of this. And so you're likely to have maybe some improvements, but not total improvement. But I do still think that there are a lot of things that diet and like herbs and things like that can do to make a difference in our stress responses. And this is where we get into the adrenals themselves and how they function and calibrating them with different herbals. Now, I've done a podcast on the adrenals before, signs you have adrenal issues and what to do about them. And that's more of a comprehensive picture of how to address the adrenals from a biological, physical, nutrition standpoint. So if this is something that you're really working on and you're kind of doing those other things, but you want more information on like diet, the diet piece of the adrenals, I'd go listen to that podcast. But as far as other things that you can do, besides eating well and on time, on a schedule, that's really key for the adrenals. Reducing your caffeine intake is important here because the caffeine causes your body to put a lot more energy into making stress hormone. And it also can upregulate insulin resistance, which can make some things worse. And I know a lot of you who listen to this podcast have PCOS. And so it's important to kind of cut back on caffeine there. But you can also do various herbs that are called adaptogens. And what these can do is they can help modulate the stress cycle, or they can modulate these stress responses in our bodies. So if we have a hyperactive stress response system because of trauma that we dealt with, then it makes it really difficult when we do experience stress in our lives. That's going to happen. Like there's no way to totally account for stress and get it out of your life. So when stress does happen, it's hard because we have these sort of overactive responses. Well, what some of these herbs can do is can help reduce those responses and just help your body deal better with stress. So there's a few that I really like, and I think it's important to mention that with these, it's really best to work with a practitioner on these. Herbs often need to be done in concert with each other to get the best outcomes. So sometimes it's not the best thing to just take one thing. And, you know, some things might be right for you, some things might not. But some of my favorites to use are ashwagandha. Ashwagandha is something that I'm a little cautious about with PCOS because it can raise testosterone. However, it also can really benefit PCOS in a lot of ways. So I kind of take it person by person. But what I love about ashwagandha is it helps it's very calming. It's very calming to the adrenals. So you take it at night, and over time, continuously taking this, it can really help to even out your responses to stress. Rhodiola is also a really good one, and this one I like better during the day. It tends to be more of an energy booster rather than a like bring you back down, but it's really a modulator for stress. So rhodiola has some good research behind it. Also some good research behind it improving fertility outcomes. So it's a little bit of a 2-for-1. I like to use those two together a lot. I really like certain combination products. There's one that I will link to. One of my favorites is called Cortisol Calm. It's by Pure Encapsulations, and I like this product because it combines ashwagandha and some other herbs and things in a really nice formula that's very calming. It's nice to take before bed, and it can help improve sleep. And if you're having trouble falling asleep at night or staying asleep because you're kind of getting like anxiety type symptoms, I find that this product works really well for a lot of people, so it might be worth a shot. Just to see if it helps you with your sleep. So those things are important. Other things that are important is accounting for our neurotransmitters. There are certain neurotransmitters that are helpful for reducing anxiety and reducing our response to stress. So GABA is a neurotransmitter that we produce that we kind of call our anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. And the interesting thing about GABA is that it's strongly connected to progesterone. And oftentimes when we have hormone imbalances, we have low progesterone, or we're not in balance correctly with that. So we need more of that. When we don't have enough, we're not getting enough GABA either. And so we are having more anxiety than we really need to. So if taking progesterone cyclically is the right move for you, and that's something that you might want to discuss with your doctor, that can help a lot with anxiety and stress response. And progesterone is like a really great muscle relaxant. But there are other things that you can do to kind of like improve your GABA or raise your progesterone levels. Vitex can be an herb that's used a lot of times to help with progesterone and increasing progesterone, even in PCOS. Again, you have to be careful with this one because it can raise LH, which sometimes is too high in PCOS, so it's not right for everyone. But cyclically, Vitex can help to regulate cycles and improve progesterone in people who are kind of lower on progesterone. So it's something to think about. One of my favorite things to do for increasing GABA is to take passion flower, which is a really potent natural remedy for making more GABA. There's also something called L-theanine, which is a component of green tea, actually, and they make little gummies of L-theanine. You can get little supplements of it, and it's a really nice supplement for just taking kind of like calming things down. I'll link to one of my favorites. It's called 100 milligrams of Zen, and it's really nice during the day when you're having a stressful day and something comes up and it's giving you a lot of anxiety and you don't feel like you're handling it well. A little well-placed GABA can help to bring you back down to earth and can help you focus on your stress relieving techniques better. I don't know if you have this problem, but I certainly do. That when I get stressed, I of course find it harder to follow my normal routine of like deep breathing skills and other coping mechanisms that I have for stress. When I'm stressed, it's harder to use those, especially if the stress catches me off guard. So sometimes a little bit of help brings me back down to earth, and I can, focus on being present and in the now. One thing that I forgot to mention before, and that is one of my favorite things that I've been working on this whole year and that I highly recommend working on too, is being and staying more in the present moment. This is really hard if you've experienced trauma in your life because you may tend to dissociate, which is where you feel like you're not really here, you're kind of daydreamy, or you're just sort of out of it, you're walking around on autopilot. There are different ways to describe it, but a lot of us who have been through trauma carry that around with us. And that dissociating is a protective mechanism, and it can happen more when we're under a lot of stress or pressure. So one of the ways that I have really been addressing the things that have been holding me back in my life is by working on staying more in the present moment. That is so much easier said than done. I will probably do a whole podcast on it at some point on the techniques that I've been using and everything, but I do want to mention a couple of books that I may have mentioned before, but I think that they're worth looking at. I remember hearing recommendations about books like this and thinking, like, rolling my eyes, like, okay, this is not for me. This is like woo-woo-y stuff, or it's just over the top. It's self-help. I don't get into that. My mind has changed about a lot of that stuff. I just feel like I've gotten a lot of value out of really taking the time with some of these books to kind of take what I can out of them. Does everything apply to me? No. But there's a book that we did in my PCOS group called How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LaPera. And I recommend that one a lot for figuring out if you had childhood trauma that maybe you don't even realize you had. That's a really interesting book. It kind of goes into how you may have been raised and your parents' kind of emotional styles and how that plays into you. And in my case, the sort of overachiever, like put pressure on themselves, perfectionism stuff, high achieving stuff, that a lot of us deal with that. And there are some reasons for that we can get into in that book. So I think that's really valuable for pairing with your sort of therapy journey. But the one that's been helping me so much lately has been The Power of Now, which is by Eckhart Tolle. I'm going to link to both of these below as well. Both of these books, especially The Power of Now, really get into how to address these sort of underlying things that we're not addressing. Power of Now is great because it teaches you a framework for how to stay in the present moment, which sounds simple, but is actually really difficult. So I find that following some of the things in the book and just reading what he says about staying present and thinking about things in a different way than I had thought about them before really has helped me. There have been some places in the book where I've kind of like been like, ugh, I don't really love that. But I've also really loved a lot of the things he said, and I'm trying my best this year to stay more open to different opinions, which has not always been something that I've been great about in the past. But I'm trying to just improve improve myself. That's what this year has been a lot about for me. It's just kind of like, it's been about finding out who I really am, and not who I am in the context of all these other people who, I used to care so much about their opinions and how they thought of me, and it's just not important. So these two books have really been helping me put a lot of things into perspective and coming into my own a bit. So I highly recommend them. I know this wasn't a completely nutrition-y podcast, but I wanted to get this out there because I feel like it's going to help some of you. I know some of you are going through the same work that I am. So wherever you are on your journey, I'm thinking about you. I'm sending you good vibes. I'm really hoping that you make your breakthrough. And if you need help addressing the nutrition piece of this, or you need a partner on this journey, of course, that's what I do for a living, and I am taking clients at the moment. So it's a good time to get in to try to work with me because there is not a huge backlog at the moment. Summer is always a nice light time, so if you have been on the fence, I would not wait until fall. It tends to get crazy. So it would be a good time to reach out now. If not, see you in the fall. But I really value you guys. I thank you so much for your opinions and for your questions. Next week, we will be doing another questions podcast, and so look out for that. If you have a question for the podcast, don't forget that there is a link below here where you can submit a question. You can stay anonymous if you want, or you can ask to be notified when the podcast comes out. I am answering all your questions about functional nutrition, PCOS, insulin resistance, thyroid, whatever your questions are, I'm answering them. So please reach out and let us know if you have a question. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that my PCOS group has now officially closed in preparation for a new venture that I am working on, which is going to be a online course with lots of different modules all about PCOS and addressing your PCOS from a functional perspective. I am working on that starting now, actually this month, and hoping to have it out in the next couple of months. So if that's something that, if you've wanted to work one-on-one but you don't have the means, or it's a little overwhelming for you to think about that, this is going to be a great middle of the road option where you're going to get lots of deep guidance from me without having to pay the one-on-one price tag. So I'm really excited about it, and I'll keep you guys updated. And I think that's it. I hope you all have a really wonderful week. Thanks so much for listening.